Well, if you're creating a dynamic of peace around you, and you're operating that sense of peace from the inside out, so you're flowing and creating an energy field of life around you, rivers of living water flowing through your innermost being, then that is going to create a frequency that begins to connect with creation and can create a sense of peace and harmony around you, so in your home, and affect creation around you. But then you have to be intentional in its focus.
Okay.
So it's a matter of focusing that intention directly towards that which you want to legislate into, administrate into, bring blessing into. So in general, as we come into our identity as sons, creation begins to respond to us. So the frequency of our sonship, our identity, it begins to connect to creation, the creational reality, and then it begins to respond to us as we then speak as an oracle of God. So we have to communicate the heart of God. And when we speak from his heart, then creation responds to us, light responds to us, we begin to form and create realities around us. But when we're looking to create a reality, we've got to ensure that that reality is aligned to the Father's heart, which means only doing what we see or feel or sense the Father doing, rather than just choosing what we want or what we might want to do. So it's important to always engage the Father before we engage reality around us, so that we're administrating that reality correctly. But in general, the more we mature, the more we grow in our sonship, the more creation will respond to us. But we can be intentional and focusing that reality around our lives. So in the spheres that we have responsibility for, our family, maybe workplace, home, any area that we have government in, we can intentionally engage that realm to bring peace and rest into it. And if we're at peace and rest, we'll then create an atmosphere of peace and rest in which to live. And that will inevitably affect other people around us in a positive way. But that being said, you can't control other people. They still have to respond in agreement, if you like. When there's agreement in people and union, then you begin to find blessing manifested. Where there's tension and conflict, then it tends to disrupt that field, which we can maintain around our own lives, even in a sense of tension with others. We don't have to be affected by other people's stuff and frequency. But if we're going to come in any sense of a wider field, then there's got to be an agreement for that to operate in a wider sense, which is why generally it doesn't, because there's not much agreement. But when people are in harmony and in that sense of union, then we can expect blessing around us and in the spheres we are. And we can bring that frequency to a place, to a workplace, to a home, but then other people need to engage with it. Even if they don't really understand, they can still come into an agreement with it, because everyone wants peace generally. And if they feel and sense an atmosphere in a place, then they'll feel more able to connect in that sort of atmosphere, really. Some of it is just that inner sense of rest and agreement in it. Obviously, the more people know and the more people are able to specifically and intentionally engage, then the more that has a positive effect on their lives. But in general, if we're creating a positive, peace-filled atmosphere and they sense that and they're at rest in that, then they're going to benefit from it. People don't have to be intentional themselves, other than this is good. Now, obviously, if you want to help people create their own atmosphere and their own place of rest, then they need to know how to generate that, and that really involves life flowing from God. You can't really generate your own peace outside of the Prince of Peace, if you like. but they can still benefit from being in your presence and in your sphere where you rule and where you establish a place of blessing. Well, our physical bodies, if we're living in a generated field of energy, can be replenished and can live in an immortal state.
Yes.
So physical bodies do not have to be subject to death or being tethered to death.
Yes.
We generate that energy that from within, and we live within the field of energy we are creating around us. So we can generate a field of immortality that we can live in. So it can affect our whole physical body. It definitely have a positive effect.
Okay.
And the more you are operating out of your identity in sonship, the greater that effect is. But you can't override people's personal choice.
Right.
So someone can still choose to be angry or grumpy or whatever, even if you're at a place of peace and rest, if they choose to. You know, you can't force them into being at rest, but you can create an environment where it makes it easier for them to be at rest, and which they feel and sense that. But if they're angry or they're bitter or resentful, then, you know, that is only creating an environment where they can choose to enter rest, but to stay in rest, they're going to have to deal with let go of their anger or bitterness or whatever else. You know, it always means an individual has to come into agreement with God over it. I think when we read something like that, we're trying to figure out some sort of interpretation of what it meant. And there are lots of different ways you could look at that. One being, well, he wasn't radiating light and different from other people in a normal sense. So they look upon him and they didn't see anything, and he wasn't dressed ostentatiously. He didn't have a crown on his head. You know, he didn't do those things to show off or to demonstrate everything. He came to serve and not be served. So there was a sense where he didn't want to draw attention to himself in a physical way that would potentially cause people to react to him wrongly. And of course, he also wanted to demonstrate to us that what he did as a man, as a son of man, a son of God, not
fully
as
man.
Yeah. He didn't do it because God could do it. He did it because he was showing what sons could do. You know, hence he only did what he saw the Father doing. I mean, he could have done whatever, you know, if he chose to, but actually he never chose to do anything independently of his relationship with the Father. And therefore the heart of the Father and his heart were one. You know, there was never a chance that he was going to do anything outside of the Father's heart, although he could have done, but he was, of course, in relationship, he was never going to do so. But that gives us the indication that we get to choose to come into agreement with the Father's heart. We chose independence or Adam chose independence on our behalf, effectively. But when we then choose to come into a relationship, you know, it isn't automatic. You know what I mean? We always have to come to that point of surrender and agreement. Yeah. It's not just, oh, it's automatically, I'm a son of God, everything is perfect, I'll never do anything wrong. We have to choose to make those choices aligned to following the path of the Father's heart rather than following any individual independent path. Because the choices are always there. Yeah, you form your agreement, you come into that agreement with the Father's heart, but eventually it becomes a state of being. When it comes to something which feels like I have a choice here, then I'm not going to go against that conscious awareness of the Father's heart, because I don't want to.
Right.
But I could, you know, and sometimes you get a sense where it feels like, well, I could do something here or not. What's the Father's heart? But generally it becomes more of a lifestyle you live and a consciousness that you have, a state of being rather than doing. So I live in that state of being where the Father's heart is communicated to me because we're face to face and heart to heart all the time. We're
Yes.
never out of a relationship, which is what Jesus had with the Father. Him and the Father were one. Well, they
Right.
weren't one being in the sense, well, it depends how you view God, obviously, in terms of Trinitarian view. But Jesus was here on earth and the Father was in him and in heaven, if you like. And that was the sort of the connection to the spiritual and the physical realm. They're both created realms for us to engage. God lives in a non-created realm of his eternal presence. So we call it eternity, if you like.
Right.
So God dwells, his actual person, Father, Son, Spirit, dwell in that realm. That is a realm outside of time and space. The heavenly realms are created, just like the physical realms are created. It's a realm of creation that we were designed to operate in heaven and earth together. So they would work together simultaneously and seamlessly. That was how it was designed. But we were created when man chose to walk independently of that, and heaven and earth separated in its connection. So restoration is bringing it back together, so heaven and earth function in a union and oneness. But God dwells, his presence dwells within that realm. But he lives, his being is within the eternal realm. And the created realm, the physical realm, are actually aspects of where he has created within himself something which has time associated with it. Yes. Whereas there is no time associated with the eternal realm, but we can still access it. You know, I access the eternal realm and I access the realm where there's no time. So that means I can access the path, if you like. But generally the spiritual realm and the physical realm are created realms, created to be in union and to work together with the spiritual and physical dimension, but actually we're in the place where they're being reconnected. God has reconciled everything to himself, and, and that then brings together all of the creational realms. So the dimensional realms, the physical realm, what we call the spiritual realm, are all designed to work together in harmony. There is nothing outside of God. There is a dimensional realm in which the physical creation has dimensions associated with it, which also are realms, dimensions. There's like heaven. So let's say heaven's a dimension, and heaven has 6 realms. Okay, so kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, heaven of heavens, perfection, and eternity within, and they're all created. But within that realm, then there's the physical realm that has our physical universe and all the planets and the stars and everything. But also within this physical realm, there are dimensional spaces, which you can't see, but you can go into, and they are also have created dimensional beings that live there. Well, they live in other dimensions, but some have engaged this dimension. I mean, I think I've been to 250 odd different ones over the last 5 or 6 years. So there's quite a lot of them.
Agree with you.
You know, and they have access into this realm, usually through portals, which are out in the constellations. There's also a place where the Father gave me access to those realms from the realm of heaven, which was beyond, you know, my experience at that point. But then the Father opened up a realm where I could engage there, but they couldn't engage this realm or the heavenly realm. It was like he showed me a portal. I could access that portal. There was an ante-room in that portal that those beings could come and I could engage with them. I don't believe in other beings within this dimension. This dimension was created for us.
Yes.
So that we could fill this dimension and expand the kingdom, God's garden, if you like, out into populate the other planets, moons, stars, things by a gateway system of travel and communication without having to go by, you know, spaceships or whatever. And there's a gateway system that connects with each of the planets of the solar system, within the realm of north, south, east, west gates, you can engage those realms. There are gateways into our solar system and beyond. And some of those dimensions are accessible from those gates. Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there. There are beings assigned to the solar system. Some of them fell, obviously, and they liked worship, so they were worshipped as gods by man. But there are also other beings. There are elementals and guardians associated with each of the planets. And the planets themselves have sentience, so you can connect with the planet.
Right. In the same way that in some way a tree is sentient.
Yes. Yeah. They have ability. Our ability as sons is to connect with creational realities. And there are elementals which God created to help man engage with these dimensional and elementals of the earth. So the earth itself has a core and a crust, and each of these things you can connect to. There is a sentience in the earth, which is a mycelial network, which is formed with plants and trees, which means the planet itself has a connection. Creation has a connection. I mean, how could creation be longing, waiting for the revealing of the sons of God? How could creation be groaning if it didn't have, a way of communicating and being communicated to? Back in about 2020, a group of us were engaging every week, and we began to engage sort of creational realities, and we engaged with light. We engaged in a place. It's the background that often I put up on these calls. We engaged within that portal and found a place that God described as the chamber of creation. And in there, light beings were waiting to be commanded to form reality. And when we went in there and we engaged it, God talked about the chamber of creation and how his voice and how we could speak and he said, name these beings. So they were living light. And I think Nancy Cohen, who was on the call, she named them quantum lumens. So they are the smallest particles of existence which form all reality. So they are light beings, basically the smallest strings of energy that exist as living light. And as we were engaging, the Father said to connect with each other in a shield around the earth that was designed to protect the earth from external influence from other dimensional beings, and to be able to focus the attention into the earth to legislate and govern. So we started doing that, and angelic beings and the quantum lumens were all part of that shield. So it was like a light shield, but also a connecting of people in the earth, in the shield. It's outside the atmosphere of the earth, protecting the earth from external influence. And that shield has increased in strength. More and more people have engaged with it. More and more people are functioning there, and they can function outwards into the cosmos and into the dimensions there. And they can also function inwards into the earth, into the core of the earth, into the atmosphere of the earth, and begin legislating for the kingdom to be established on earth as it is in heaven. So God has invited people to participate in the earth shield and be part of the restoration of all things process, really. But they were waiting to be communicated with and spoken to. So there's a process that then the Father showed me of brooding within the cradle of life, and then as we become resonated with his heart and his thoughts and his mind, then when we speak as an oracle, and then the chamber of creation begins to vibrate with our voice, and then light responds to us and reality becomes formed. And now we can do that around our lives all the time. On a wider sphere, you need union of hearts and minds with God's heart and mind to be able to do that for a wider sphere. Hence, the earth shield enabled us to be able to begin to focus our intention aligned to the Father's heart towards the earth for its restoration. I think in general, the frequency of the planet is lowered by fear. And if people don't know who they are and don't know their sonship, then they're going to be operating at a lower frequency, and that will affect the planet itself. It's complicated in that there's a difference between climate change and global warming. And climate change happens in cycles and is to do with the sun.
Yes.
As we administrate the sun, we can mitigate climate change and bring about, as God intended, a temperate environment where everything would be fruitful and replenishing. But we have contributed to climate change dynamics with what we've done with the planet, and therefore affected that cycle. And therefore we see global warming as a result of what we've done with climate and gases and whatever, but also animals and our farming and husbandry of animals and all that stuff, because essentially methane is one of the big gases, and most of the methane comes from animals, but also, there's CO2 and everything else. So we've made it worse than the cycle would have been anyway. But we need to, as sons, begin to legislate for the sun to stop harming the earth with solar radiation in a harmful way. And that's part of bringing the solar system back into balance and harmony. The sun was not created to damage the earth. It was created to create a light without the overextending heat or radiation, which was harmful or damaging.
Yes.
And since the sun and all the planets came out of sync, and the sun, in a sense, has become the center of worship within the solar system, it is taking on a role which it was never intended to have. More that the sun has been out of balance with what it was originally intended, how it was originally intended to function. Therefore, solar radiation, solar flares, solar activity is more volatile, and as if it's acting angrily in cycles. Now, you could say they were natural cycles, or you could say they were just destructive cycles. I don't think God ever intended them. God wanted the earth and the solar system to be in harmony and balance, that everything was in a sense of creative state for habitation. And we were supposed to fill the earth and extend the government of God beyond the earth. The solar system would have been the next place we would have engaged, and then we would have gone beyond the solar system. But obviously it all got messed up. So essentially we're in a process of seeing it restored, but our relationship with it has to be restored, and our connection to creation and the beings that were assigned to creation have to be restored. Otherwise we're always seemingly at war, and there's never a sense of peace and rest. So it's always, the sun is sort of, well, if you look at the sun in a natural sense, it is very, very volatile, but we're only looking at it as it is now. I think we will be able to terraform those places. I think originally they would have not needed. They have different purposes, and not all the planets were created to be habitable. So Jupiter has got such a mass that it was designed to protect the other planets from asteroids and other things hitting them, because it absorbs, because it's bigger than all the other planets put together. And that was why it was created. So it was created to form an environment where you wouldn't have all these disruptions, so that each of the planets had a purpose. But they have moons which were designed to be habitable. The moon, again, people have different ideas of what they think the moon was designed for. Some people think it was never intended, but it happened through other things. I believe it talks about God establishing the sun and moon and stars as a picture of government and to bring, a sense they're governors and they revolve and they're to do with time and seasons and things like that. So if we didn't have the moon, we wouldn't have seasons. We wouldn't have tides. We wouldn't have lots of things which are to do with cycles of the moon. So I believe that the moon has a purpose, but that purpose probably has been thwarted over time. And if you look at the surface of the moon, it looks pretty much that it's suffered a lot of damage. The actual solar system itself, each of the planets was designed with purpose and to be in harmony with the Earth. So Saturn produces frequencies that were designed to bring about a replenishing atmosphere on the Earth. Other planets had different purposes, but those purposes have been corrupted. So first of all, our responsibility is to restore the balance and harmony and the relationship between the planets, and to see those planets begin to function and bring harmony so that the Earth and the planet and the solar system can be a pattern for the rest of the universe to come back into balance and harmony. In a sense, the constellations, the Mazzaroth, as they were known in the Hebrew, basically was the outer wheel where the constellations cycled every 24,000 so hundred years. Now, there's an inner wheel and an inner wheel, which are designed a wheel within a wheel within a wheel to bring all of that back so that we're not subject to it, but that is subject to us. And therefore, there's a sense where we have to learn to govern the times and seasons and not be subject to them. Now, obviously, we have a complicated connection to it all that's in process of being restored. So it's not as it was intended to be, but we're working at it. And ultimately, everything will be restored back to God's original intention and purpose as we would be rather than as it was. So Adam was sinless but not perfected. If he had continued to follow the walk with the Father, he would have become perfected, and all of the sons would have been perfected in their identity. Essentially, we would have ascended into an ascended state of co-creatorship with God. But Adam walked independently. Man has created humanistic solutions to a lot of things. And they've been very creative, and because we're made in the image of God, but they wouldn't have been how it would have been if Adam had not chosen independence. But he did. Therefore, we now look to see restoration to where things would be if Adam hadn't have fallen. It's just the state that God desired us to dwell in.
It's Eden.
Yeah. Eden expanded to fill the universe, basically. Yeah. He represented fallen man, not perfected man, and therefore could deal with our lost identity and restore it. He identified with us fully, which is why he would say, my God, why have you forsaken me? The Father never forsook Jesus.
He just felt like it.
We felt it. We felt like he'd forsaken us. He never did, but we felt that because we felt lesser because of our independence. So we'd lost our state of union and relationship. So we felt like we were separated from God and that God had separated from us, but he never did. So Jesus came to completely change that dynamic and bring about a restored, reconciled relationship. But it was only from our part. He wasn't trying to change God's mind. He was changing our minds. He was changing our hearts, not God's. God had always loved us. He'd never changed.
We're always in.
So God made it possible for us there to come into that reconciled relationship. So Jesus was the Son of Man, the Son of God, but he wasn't Adam. He was, you could say the Bible describes him as the last Adam.
Right.
So where the first Adam did this, Jesus came as the final completion of to restore what Adam had done in that way, because he was God. The Holy Spirit placed a fertilized egg into Mary. The ova wasn't Mary's and the sperm wasn't Joseph's. So Jesus was not a a human as coming from Mary or Joseph. He was a created being in the sense of the Son of God in human form, and his genetics would have been as ours should have been, obviously. And obviously wanting to bring us back into that restored relationship where our genetic material comes back into the fullness of God. Now, ultimately, that would have been, we started off with 3 strands of DNA. We lost the light strand of DNA when our spirit disconnected, and that was restored, but we would eventually take on the 9 other strands of God's DNA. We've got 3 because our spirit is the 3rd strand of light. Our makeup is spirit, soul, and body. Therefore, that's presented in a way. But ultimately, if we had matured, we would have matured on the 9 stones or fire stones into 12 stones. So ultimately, the high priest had 12 stones of government, which is man and God in government together. Ultimately, you realize that we're designed and created for oneness. You've got to sort of understand that Jesus was operating in an old covenant setting. And therefore, what Jesus taught the disciples mostly was how to connect in an old covenant cycle. So when he was saying, you know, our Father who art in heaven, he wasn't saying this is what we should be doing in the new covenant. He was just saying, look, you need to connect to God now, see God in heaven and earth and the kingdom being established and all those things. This is going to change your dynamic of relationship with God in this way. But when Jesus started to talk about the new covenant, and that specifically is talked about is in John's gospel, the whole of John's gospel comes out from a different dynamic completely, because Jesus is now talking to disciples who are following him, and he talks about love and who he was. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You know, I am the bread of life. You know, all those 7 I am statements and everything else. They're not mentioned in any of the other gospels, because in those other gospels, Jesus is trying to get them to follow him, leave Judaism, leave the old covenant and law behind, and follow him. So he's challenging them, and therefore challenging the Pharisees and those who are trying to lead them astray and keep them in the old system. He's trying to get them to follow him out of that old system. So he warns them about what the end of the old system would be, and the collapse of the old system, and the end of the temple, and the end of the old system of sacrifices and offerings and all that stuff. He warns them what's going to happen. And he's basically saying, follow me out of that system and come into the new covenant, which is coming through me, my blood, my body given for you. And then, but John, who had a more intimate relationship with the Father, and it talks about laying on his chest, you know, that's with Jesus. John's gospel is the revelation of the new covenant, of those who are already following him. So you get, when Jesus talks about, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, that's old covenant. It's not new.
So
that's what it was under the law. That's the best they could do under the law. But in the new, love one another as I've loved you. So it's all now, I love you, you can love. You don't have to try with all your strength to do this. Let me love you, now you can love. Totally different dynamic in the new covenant, because it's not based in works, it's based in grace. So when John talks about, you know, new commandment I give unto you, love one another as I've loved you, that's not mentioned in the other ones, because he was still trying to get them out of the old covenant. So he didn't want to, when he was talking to the Pharisees and he's talking to those, well, when he's talking to his disciples in the context of the new covenant, then the whole passage from John 12 to John 17 is all about this sort of new life. You know, the world will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. You know, Jesus talking about on the resurrection day, you're going to know that I'm in you and you're in me and we're in the Father, and this new relationship is going to be established. None of that is in the other 3 gospels, because the other 3 gospels are focusing on getting people out of the old covenant into the new, and John's gospel is really describing what the new is like. So Jesus wasn't talking about prayer, because I don't think you find the Lord's Prayer in John's Gospel, as we call it, the Lord's Prayer. So Jesus was therefore saying, look, this is how you can engage God at the moment, but actually it's going to change when you follow me, because I'm going to lead you into a new and living way, if you like. So a lot of what Jesus said wasn't speaking to us today, it was speaking to them then. But John's Gospel was speaking to all those who would follow him into the future. But most of the other stuff is really very much, some of it's history, some of it's what happened to him, some of it's, the cross and what happened on the cross and all of that, in Matthew's Gospel, and what he was telling them to do in the transition, and Matthew 24, all of that, what was going to be the end of the old and beginning of the new, all of that was in the context of they were still, Israel, or theirs in Jerusalem, were still following that old covenant system. And he warned them not to stay in Jerusalem, but to leave and follow him. But obviously some did and some didn't. So you have them, ending up in Jerusalem when it was besieged to bring about the end of the old in AD 70. So a lot of what Jesus was talking about was very much specifically talking in a context to Jewish people following Judaism so that they could leave Judaism and follow him. That's some of the parables, where he's talking about, the different dynamics of the kingdom, and he's talking to them about some of the parables about, the God coming and sending the prophets and then sending his son and then rejecting him, and all of that is in that context. So, I wouldn't be looking to get doctrine from Matthew, Mark, and Luke primarily, because it was very much in an old covenant setting. But we have a very different setting when it comes to John and the revelation that Jesus gave to John, which I think most of it was for us and still applies. And Hebrews very much was written to say, hey, don't keep following the old covenant. Hence, Hebrews 6, don't lay again a foundation of repentance from dead works, faith in God. That's all old covenant stuff. We don't need faith in God when we know God. That was what they needed when they didn't know him. Repentance from dead works. Well, they had to change their whole thinking from what they did do, which was the sacrificial system, no longer applying that in the new. Laying on of hands, baptisms or washings, ceremonial washings. It wasn't talking about laying on of hands to pray for someone. It was saying laying on of hands to transfer your sin into an animal, which is what they did. That's a foundation that don't need anymore. So Hebrews 6 is what most people teach their foundation series of church about. And actually it's saying, don't lay this foundation. This is old. Don't do that. It's an old system. Don't bring it into the new. But people have just taken that and said, oh, we need to teach about repentance from dead works and faith in God and, baptisms. And I did it myself. And we had a whole series of teaching based around Hebrews 6. As well, these are the foundations we need to teach people. But in reality, they were, do not lay again this old covenant foundation. And it's very much something we should be very careful that we don't do, because it is mixing of covenants. And a lot of what we call Christianity today is a mixture of covenants, because people think everything that Jesus said applies to them today. So we should try and love God with all our heart, all our strength, all our mind and neighbors. No, all we have to do is let him love us and love others in the same way. It's so much simpler than following a whole set of rules and, festivals, and because they're all types and shadows of Jesus being the fulfillment of every promise of God. And all the old covenant things that God made is fulfilled in Jesus fully and completely without human interaction. Because a lot of what the old covenant is about is what Moses gave to them because they didn't want a relationship with God because of fear. God never intended a sacrificial system of religion. You know, he wanted relationship. They didn't want relationship. So he allowed them to set up a way that there could be something, but they still didn't do it. They still didn't follow it, you know, and they couldn't fulfill it. How could they ever be good enough without grace? But then we're saved by grace through faith, not of our own. So it's not even our faith that saves us. It's his faith in us, not our faith in him. You know, which changes the whole dynamic away from religion into relationship. And that's what he's looking for, simple relationship, which will bring about the change and transformation of who we are into who he has always known we are. We get to know who we really are through that relationship, which is sons of God. Those systems are things that they have developed
and they're comfortable with, and they're secure
with. Yeah, and they're secure in it, but they were never God's intention. So I don't believe God is going to restore the church as an institution, because I don't think he ever wanted the church as an institution in the first place. What he's going to do is actually establish the ecclesia, which is people in relationship with him and each other with a kingdom governmental perspective to establish heaven on earth, which is very different from, you know, what we see as church. It's known as church. God didn't intend that. Not to say that he hasn't used it, because he used people, he'll work with people, but it's not his intention. It's so much better when we enter into that which God has for us to enjoy and to celebrate and take all the works and labor and toil out of it. Yeah, they'd have to shut down all their systems, all their organizations, shut it all down, and just get back to the simplicity of relationship and love. You know, Jesus didn't say, oh, your great organizational structures will show that you're my disciples. He said it's your love for one another. And that's what the world is looking for. They're not looking for another corporate system. They've got enough of those already, and they don't work either. So why set up the church to be an organization? Because it's man-made. The true church, or the true ecclesia, which is the word, because the word church is not obviously a biblical word, ecclesia is, had a completely different understanding and meaning to what we now have called church.
Right.
And actually what we have called Christianity. Jesus didn't come to set up another religion. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.